Hello and welcome to what is possibly the most controversial video I will ever make. And I once, according to some folks on the internet, recorded the endowment ceremony and put it on the internet. But with that blatant falsehood out of the way, please join me as I rank every Mormon prophet from best to worst, and, spoiler alert, it certainly isn't a nice, evenly distributed bell curve. Also, it is important to remember that I, Nemo, have spoken what I have spoken, and I excuse not myself. Hey, I'm just likening the scriptures unto myself. But if you don't like my decisions, feel free to express your discontent in the comments section, but please know that nothing will change. And with that, here's the tier list. S is the best and D is the worst. And we're kicking off with the man who kicked it all off. It's Joseph Smith, the architect of the whole Mormon movement. When I did this ranking live a couple of weeks ago, I really struggled to place him. I have reflected since, and here's what I've got. He destroyed the Nauvoo Expositor in order to try and suppress information about his practice of polygamy. That same information and that same newspaper is now being cited by the church as a credible contemporary source. That's not cool, Joseph. William Law's newspaper contained credible information according to the church that you started. And then we just get into sending men on missions and marrying their wives, the happiness letter in which he, through the voice of God, threatens Nancy Rigdon with destruction if she won't become one of his plural wives. And so it's really quite easy actually to just put Joseph Smith right in the D tier. It's also just as easy for our next contender. Brigham Young introduced the Adam God doctrine. He introduced blood atonement. Blood atonement being that some sins require the shedding of that person's blood in order to atone for them. The atonement of Jesus Christ is somehow not enough. And when he wasn't teaching things like that, he was trying to get his son to be the president of the church by ordaining him as an apostle at the age of 11. Now, 1900 saw the change of succession rules by Lorenzo Snow so that it was the longest serving member of the 12, not the longest ordained apostle, who would become president, and that precluded Brigham Young's son. But between the doctrines that he taught and the way in which he tried to set up a nepotistic empire, it will come as no shock to any of you that Brigham Young is the king of D tier. And if I knew how to add a lower tier, he'd probably end up there, to be honest. The same can't be said of John Taylor, who followed Brigham Young. He was saved by a pocket watch when he was in the room in which Joseph Smith was killed. He's also been in the Mormon zeitgeist recently as the church has finally admitted that a revelation he gave exists. It was a revelation from 1886 in which he said, "Thus saith the Lord, all commandments that I give must be obeyed by those calling themselves by my name, unless they are revoked by me or by my authority. And how can I revoke an everlasting covenant? For I, the Lord, am everlasting, and my everlasting covenants cannot be abrogated nor done away with, but they stand forever. I have not revoked this law, nor will I, for it is everlasting." John Taylor also had the largest age gap with any plural wife. He was 78 when he married 26-year-old Josephine Elizabeth Roche. Roche? I've been corrected once before in the comments, I will be corrected again. It's not looking great, but then he receives an upgrade to C tier. Why? He's English. That's all it takes. He's the only English prophet of the church, a church that once was formed of more members from the British Isles than it was of Americans. We've only had one English prophet. But at least now we have an English apostle again. On to Wilford Woodruff. Wilford Woodruff is the prophet that tried to end polygamy with his 1890 manifesto. He, like Brigham Young though, also tried to get his son in as prophet by ordaining him very young, at the age of 24. Now unfortunately, because he refused to be vaccinated against it, his son died of smallpox on a visit to his post-manifesto plural wife, whom he married 11 years after his dad said, "Let's stop polygamy, everyone." Wilford Woodruff couldn't get his own son to stop polygamy, and that doesn't bode very well for his score. Into the C tier he goes. Moving on to Lorenzo Snow, we have a prophet who has an absolutely cracking beard. He also made tithing a more common and well-defined practice. And in something that absolutely screams early Mormonism, he is the brother-in-law to both Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. His sister, Eliza R. Snow, was one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, and then when Brigham Young started taking over some of Joseph's plural wives after his death, Eliza R. Snow becomes the wife of Brigham Young. And we have to remember that he changed the rules around prophetic succession to omit John Willard, Brigham Young's son. And what we can take from that is that if anyone says the way that leaders of the church are selected cannot be changed, it absolutely can. Because of all this, Lorenzo Snow gets a B tier, and we are moving on up. At this point is where things start to get really interesting. Joseph F. Smith through to Howard W. Hunter, it starts to get a little bit spicy and a little bit trickier to rank these guys. Joseph F. Smith actually ended polygamy, making it an excommunicatable offence through his second manifesto in 1904. He also gave us hope with the 1907 statement on tithing. Furthermore, I want to say to you, we may not be able to reach it right away, but we expect to see the day when we will not have to ask you for $1 of donation for any purpose, except that which you volunteer to give of your own accord, because we will have tithes sufficient in the storehouse of the Lord to pay everything that is needful for the advancement of the kingdom of God. Joseph F. Smith also had a beard so long that it didn't fit in the image that I selected for him. Unfortunately, he was also the last of the long-bearded prophets. Things come a little bit unstuck for him though with the Smoot hearings, where he said the following. Have you received any individual revelations yourself since you became president of the church, under your own definition even of a revelation? I cannot say that I have. Can you say that you have not? No, I cannot say that I have not. Then you do not know whether you have received any such revelation as you have described, or whether you have not. Well, I can say this, that if I live as I should in the line of my duties, I am susceptible, I think, of the impressions of the Spirit of the Lord upon my mind at any time, just as any good Methodist or any other church member might be. And so far as that is concerned, I say yes, I have had impressions of the Spirit upon my mind very frequently, but they are not in the sense revelations. Joseph F. Smith was a B tier in my original video, but having now remembered the Smoot stuff, where he's saying he gets impressions of the Spirit the same way a Methodist does, I find myself asking, what does that mean for the gift of the Holy Ghost, which the unbaptized and confirmed Methodist does not have? That's to say nothing of the fact that as prophet of the Mormon Church, he is God's mouthpiece on earth. So downplaying the personal revelation received by a prophet of the church to be the same as anyone of any other denomination really doesn't sit well with me. At least Russell M. Nelson has the guts to own the fact that he sort of turfs his wife out of bed when God starts providing him with revelation. For all that, Joseph F. Smith goes into C tier, and we move on to the prophet who was once pictured beneath a swastika while visiting members of the church who were living under the influence of the Nazi Party. Now, of course, this isn't to say that Heber J. Grant has any sympathies for Nazi ideology. However, according to the work of David Lee Nelson, it seems the same can't be said of J. Reuben Clark, but that's a video for another time. Heber J. Grant's major contribution to Mormonism seems to have come in the form of making the word of wisdom a temple recommend requirement, possibly due to his own previous experiences with daily alcohol consumption. His other major contribution seems to be to get rid of the long beard. You know, the one that his predecessor Joseph F. Smith wore so well. And speaking of those two, a fun fact, Heber J. Grant and Joseph F. Smith were the prophets of the 2 world wars. And they both died within 2 weeks of the end of their respective wars in Europe. Just a fun fact. So with that, to the B tier this man goes. George Albert Smith was a big advocate of the Boy Scouts. He was involved in the adoption of the Boy Scouts into the MIA, the Church's youth program, between 1912 and 1913. Unfortunately, we've seen what that relationship between the church and the Boy Scouts has led to. He brought one institution that has weaknesses that have been exploited by abusers into the orbit and influence of another institution that has weaknesses that are exploited by abusers. He was also president of the church when the first presidency statement in 1949 came out about the ban on black members holding the priesthood and attending the temple. He said it was not a matter of the declaration of policy, but of direct commandment from the Lord. While this statement was racist and that harm is being taken into account, I also appreciate that we have this statement at all, which allows us to rebuff the claims of certain apologists that the ban on salvation for black members was a mere policy. However, this statement did make it more difficult for subsequent prophets to end the ban. So in sum, he's not quite a D tier prophet, but he's certainly the bottom of C tier. Now we get on to David O. McKay, who oversaw one of the largest correlation movements in the church's history. He gave the assignment to Harold B. Lee, who really went to town with it. This seems to me to be the beginning of the church being run by committee. David O. McKay also had a first presidency of 6 members by the time of his death, and I believe he was the first prophet to have this many. It was required because he wasn't allowed to retire, so he needed people around him to support him. But I would ask at this point, why not just hand over the running of the church to the 12, like the sort of interregnum we had between the death of Brigham Young and the ordination of John Taylor. David O. McKay was also the uncle of Fawn Brodie, who wrote No Man Knows My History, and he was, unfortunately, the first beardless prophet. Despite being a very well-known church president, he seems fairly innocuous, and he's going to go straight in the middle at the B tier. However, I don't think the same can be said for the next prophet on our list. Joseph Fielding Smith made an absolute corker of a prediction as an apostle in 1961 when he said, "We will never get a man into space." I feel fairly confident saying he was wrong about that. He also wrote The Way to Perfection, which reiterated ideas that black individuals were less valiant in the pre-existence. His works were compiled by Bruce R. McConkie into Doctrines of Salvation, and he also wrote Answers to Gospel Questions, and both of these works contained similar racist ideas. And to seal his entry into the D tier, he is the one that removed the 1832 account of the First Vision from a journal and put it into the First Presidency vault. Okay, so I will make this clear. These pages were kept in Joseph Fielding Smith's safe, and it is possible he's the one that removed them, although there are a couple of other people it might have been, so I just wanted to make that clear. Now before we head on to Harold B. Lee, by now I'm sure some of you have got plenty to say about this list, and that's great, please put it in the comments. Or better yet, sign up to my Patreon, where I'll be hosting live Q&As just for those who want to go the extra mile in supporting my work financially. Some people support me through DonorBox and don't want anything back, but some people want to interact with me more in exchange for their support. I'm doing my best to cater to both groups, and either way your support is greatly appreciated. Now let's get to the man who was the principal of a school at 18 and established the Bishop's Storehouse. To be honest, that's all I had on Harold B. Lee originally. When I was live streaming this, there was cries in the comments that he was a massive racist and ruined the church through correlation. Correlation, and particularly the correlated curriculum, does seem to have taken the vibrancy out of the church, in the sense that a correlated curriculum made individuals less likely to discover things, like perhaps the actual method of the Book of Mormon translation, which opens them up to faith crises when the church later admits that this is what happened. He also seemed to put the brakes on Hugh B. Brown's attempts to soften or even reverse the priesthood and temple ban for black members, by reminding everyone that it would take a direct revelation from God to change this position. And so for that, and for correlation, to C tier this guy goes. And now we come to possibly one of the trickiest prophets to rank. Spencer W. Kimball ended the priesthood and temple ban for black members of the church, ending over 100 years of overt doctrinal racism. This is S tier behaviour. But he also wrote The Miracle of Forgiveness. Some individuals have taken their lives over the guilt and shame-inducing perfectionism contained in that book. He was also the president of the church when Mark Hoffman deceived church leaders into buying forged documents through an intermediary. And he established the Indian Placement Program. He said at the October 1960 General Conference, at one meeting a father and mother and their 16-year-old daughter were present. The little member girl, 16, sitting between the dark father and mother, and it was evident she was several shades lighter than her parents. On the same reservation, in the same hogan, subject to the same sun and wind and weather. There was the doctor in a Utah city who for 2 years had had an Indian boy in his home who stated that he was some shades lighter than the younger brother just coming into the program from the reservation. These young members of the church are changing to whiteness and delightsomeness. One elder jokingly said that he and his companion were donating blood regularly to the hospital in the hope that the process might be accelerated. So I'm here weighing up the ending of the priesthood ban with the other stuff. And so I think he's going to have to go in the top of B tier, because ending the ban can only redeem him so far. And as seems to be an emerging theme, the next prophet is much easier to rank than the last one we've just done. Ezra Taft Benson was incredibly right-wing. He was also obsessed with communism.
Communism introduced into the world a substitute for true religion. It is a counterfeit to the gospel plan. The false prophets of communism predict a utopian society. This, they proclaim, will only be brought about as capitalism and free enterprise are overthrown, private property abolished, the family as a social unit eliminated, all classes abolished, all governments overthrown, and a communal ownership of property in a classless, stateless society established.
Okay, so a couple of points here. First, doesn't that just sound like the law of consecration to you, which we covenant to in the temple? And then secondly, I'm not saying, boo, right-wing equals bad. What I'm saying is it's a problem to be that incredibly right-wing when you claim to speak for a church that claims to be politically neutral. As a member of the Birch Society, he tried to run for president and then vice president with the support of the Birch Society. And he also said a living prophet is more important than a dead prophet. He's headed straight into D tier, but fear not, because redemption is at hand, and his name is Howard W. Hunter. Howard W. Hunter was the shortest-lived church president. He was also the first president of the church to be born in the 20th century and the last to die in the 20th century. He shrugged off a bomb threat in 1993.
It is a wonderful privilege for me to be with all the students
before we go out. Here's the dynamite. Let's go.
He also fell over in conference and just got up and carried on as though nothing happened.
The everyday variety.
I'm right off the shaker from the fresh. You're okay.
The everyday variety, as well as restored sight to the blind and restored hearing to the deaf. We may be truly bewildered at the unexplainable principles and processes that bring about such wonders.
And if that wasn't enough, he had a dance band called Hunters Crunaders, and they did a cruise ship tour. There is nowhere for this man to go but the S tier of this ranking. And you would expect this theme of great rankings for prophets to continue with Gordon B. Hinckley, but prepare to be disappointed. Gordon B. Hinckley was everyone's favourite cheeky chappie. Well, apart from Russell M. Nelson's. Despite that cheeky chappie appearance, he oversaw the creation of the LLCs, or shell companies, that were used to hide the size and nature of the church's wealth from the public and from church members. The fine that resulted from this behaviour cost the church $5 million. Oh, but you might say, he came up with that list of B's that was delightful. I'll put it on screen. And yes, he and Mike Otterson made a great PR combo. But he wasn't always honest on TV. For example, he said,
in my country, we say people's churches, the Protestants, the Catholics, they publish all their budgets openly to all the public.
Yeah.
Why it's impossible for your church?
Well, we simply think that that information belongs to those who made the contribution and not to the world. That's the only thing.
The members of the church haven't seen the church's transparent financial information since 1959. So while he may be a cheeky chappie, he was also able to be quite deceptive. And so perhaps it's only fitting that he ends up in the B tier. Get it? The B's. Thomas S. Monson was the prophet of my childhood. He can also wiggle his ears.
I looked squarely at him, certain I had his attention, and then I wiggled my ears.
Which again is just S-tier behaviour. He was a bishop at 22, which I think shows that he did have some sort of connection to the rank and file members of the church in a way that maybe other church leaders didn't. He continued the church's good PR with the I'm a Mormon campaign, but another thing he allowed to continue was the shell company nonsense that was going on. He was also president of the church at the time that Prop 8 was happening, and for a man who is known for his relationship with widows, he sure spent their mites on things which I'm not sure Jesus would have, such as spending over $1 billion on City Creek Mall and launching it like this.
1, 2, 3, let's go shopping!
The money to build that mall came from the church's rainy day fund, Enzyme Peak. And so, I guess insert here a joke about making it rain with cash. He's another B-tier prophet, which makes our last contender's low rank, while not surprising, all the more stark. Russell M. Nelson undid all the hard work of Gordon B. Hinckley and Thomas S. Monson to make the nickname Mormon shine with added luster. Despite the millions of dollars spent by his two predecessors, he called the use of the nickname Mormon a
major victory for Satan.
Russell M. Nelson was the first prophet of the church to reach 100 years old, and boy did he make sure that we knew all about it.
All right, everybody join in. Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, President Nelson. Happy birthday to
And in that vein, his presidency could be framed as trying to outdo Gordon B. Hinckley at every turn. Whether it be announcing more temples, or whether it be living longer, or whether it be trying to get the same level of adoration, or whether it be getting rid of the nickname Mormon that Gordon B. Hinckley made shine. And on that last point, it seems that this stems from a couple of talks given in 1990. I've done a full video on this, which I will put at the end of this video, But essentially Hinckley put Nelson in his place when Nelson was trying to say that we need to stop using the nickname Mormon and start using the full name of the church. Russell M. Nelson is a D-tier prophet, simply because he seems to want to be loved too much. Similar to individuals who are desperate for some sort of prize, the fact that he seems to want to be so beloved makes him sort of distinctly unlikable. For me personally, he's always lacked a certain warmth. Now this has been a really fun video to remake after the original ranking that I did as a live stream. I feel better informed and more confident in my rankings, and yet of course the ranking is still flawed. I have likely been inconsistent in my judgment and allowed my own nostalgia, and certainly my nationality, to skew the rankings. All that is to say, this was a little bit of fun, and if you disagree deeply with my decisions, there is a link to the tier list in the pinned comment, through which you yourself can rate the prophets. If you do your own list, please share it, because I would love to see it. You are very likely to disagree with me, and that is absolutely fine. I'd love to see how our lists are similar and how they differ. So please, go ahead and make your own list. And then if you're interested in more details about the relationship between Gordon B. Hinckley and Russell M. Nelson, you should check out this video right here. And if this is the third or fourth video of mine that you've watched, well, you're clearly enjoying them. So why not consider subscribing so these videos come straight to you and we don't have to rely on the notoriously fickle YouTube algorithm. You can do that just here.